Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for being with us today for Doing Business with MassDevelopment. I'm Tom Brown. I'm the Senior Director of Economic Inclusion at the Chamber, and I've had the pleasure of overseeing our Pacesetters initiative, along with my colleagues Amber Haskell and Juliet Chan. While we have a large focus on this programme in terms of facilitating the development of supply diversity practices within our network of corporate buyers, the Pacesetters initiative also aims to provide the best possible insights for minority-owned businesses to help them engage and partner with the buyers, like MassDevelopment. Our Doing Business series is a key element of that, with this being our 15th webinar in the series, and we're grateful to all of our corporate buyers and our programme sponsor, Eastern Bank, for the continued commitment to this work. Before I introduce today's speakers, I just have a couple of final notes. Firstly, the webinar is being recorded and it will be shared on our YouTube page shortly after the presentation. For those joining us live today, please submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A feature, and that's on the right-hand side of your screen, and make sure you send those to all panelists. Alternatively, you could email your questions to economicinclusion@bostonchamber.com, and I'll be putting those questions to our panelists at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our speakers. Firstly, we have Teresa Park, Deputy Director and Senior Executive Vice President at MassDevelopment. Teresa joined MassDevelopment in March of 2021 and brings 25 years of regional and municipal planning experience, most recently serving as the Executive Director of the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission before she joined MassDevelopment. Welcome, Teresa. Secondly, we have Claire O'Neill, Senior Vice President of Real Estate Planning. Claire joined MassDevelopment's Real Estate Division in 2014 and manages a team of planners that support communities with economic development planning and technical assistance to reposition municipal surplus properties. Claire is also a project manager for a multidisciplinary team responsible for large-scale redevelopment projects like Carriage Grove, Belchertown, and Village Hill in Northampton. Welcome, Claire. And last but certainly not least, we have Annabelle Rondon, who is the Deputy Director of the Transformative Development Initiative, also known as TDI, and that's focused on strategy and operations. Annabelle joined MassDevelopment in 2021, and she now oversees many of the daily operations of the TDI program, working on program strategy, design, scoping, and managing technical assistance projects, as well as special projects like the small developer cohort. Welcome, Annabelle. So these are our panelists. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to go off camera now and pass over to the team who are going to get us started, and then I will join back at the end for Q&A. So Teresa, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. And we really appreciate the invitation to participate in this webinar, because this topic is something that's near and dear to our organization, and is something that we're really trying hard to make more inroad into. So let's get going with the slide presentation. So to begin with, I would like to more formally introduce or in great detail introduce our team. So I'm now, in addition to being here with you today, I am accompanied by Annabelle Rondon, who is our TDI Deputy Director for Strategy and Operations. You'll learn a little bit more about TDI. It stands for Transformative Development Initiative. It's a program that we have in 13 gateway cities right now. Annabelle, please correct me if I'm wrong with that number. It's one where we look to have place a hyper-local focus into an area within the city, and where we try to make some transformative impact and change that catalyzes other investments as well. And then Claire O'Neill, who is our Senior Vice President for Real Estate Planning. She has her hands in a lot of different real estate projects. You will learn as we talk a little bit more about the key areas that MassDevelopment is involved in, that one of the key components is real estate, and that's one that's overseen by Claire. So really fortunate to have two very talented women who will be speaking more about some of the procurement opportunities that will be available through MassDevelopment. As for our agenda today, we will tell you a little bit more about our organization, what we do so that you're familiar with us, as well as the different types of procurement opportunities that may be of interest to you. One thing I would ask at this moment is that while I believe that the attendance list will be shared with us so that we know who's present and what capabilities you bring to the table, if you have a chance, just introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are and what are the what your business is, so that as we talk through the slides, if we can directly relate it to your business sector, we will try to do so. Both Claire and Annabelle will talk more specifically about the procurement that we hire for, and you'll see those listed here, but more on that later on. As far as who we are, so we are a quasi-state agency, meaning that while we are sort of a government entity, we are governed by our own board of directors who approve a lot of the work that we do. We are the state's finance agency as well as the land bank. And what that means is we have a lot of programs that support business growth as well as real estate investment. We are also what's called a land bank, which means that we can play a pivotal role when with real estate, if it's a case where it makes sense for an entity to hold it to allow for higher and best use of that property later on, then we could play a role in making that happen. We also oversees the C. Devens, which is right by 495 Route 2, if you're not familiar with it, where we're taking an old military base and have convert that into a very vibrant mixed-use community. From an impact standpoint, you'll see noted in the slide that we have financed and managed 356 projects, which have generated close to $1.7 billion into the Massachusetts economy. And that investment translates to creating and supporting over 11,000 jobs, as well as preserving nearly 1,800 housing units. And because we work so closely with the state government, the priorities like support for housing, particularly around transit-oriented areas, support for job opportunities, we are very vested in seeing more opportunities grow in those sectors. So to sum up the last slide, basically it's finance, real estate, and technical assistance. Our mission is very closely aligned, as I mentioned, with the states, and the next two slides will pretty much attest to that and talk a little bit about what are our primary goals, which you see in this instance is stimulating business, driving economic growth, and helping communities thrive across the Commonwealth. So while we are heavily invested in the success of our gateway cities, we also know that there are a number of other communities that share similar socioeconomic statistics. So we're out there, we have community investment folks that are out there regularly in touch with businesses and the city government in those places to identify places of opportunity, whether it's working with businesses, nonprofits, financial institutions, because we very much partner with banks. We do not replace banks, we partner with them. And also, of course, working with municipalities through our number of different programs. And we already talked a little bit about the outcomes that we're striving for, because our economic priorities closely align with that of the state as well as other agencies in the Commonwealth. And then these, of course, reinforces what we have already talked about as far as some of our key areas. And again, aligning with the state's economic development plan and in thinking about how we build a very vibrant community, which then leads to a vibrant state. And these are the pillars and principles by which how we target our work and our resources. I should also mention in this instance that there is I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, because it applies to both there's programs both for the private sector as well as the nonprofit and public sector, which is that there's been announcements very recently about the state's one-stop program. Many of our programs do go through the one-stop process. That's a little bit separate from the procurement standpoint, but in thinking about, and while this is really geared towards procurement, I don't want to miss an opportunity to avail our other programs should they have some relevance to the work that you do. And then as far as, a single slide snapshot of who we are and what we do and how we help, I think this slide summarizes that very well. And how we got to this particular point in presenting before you as part of the Pacesetters program, and think about who is MassDevelopment as far as our DEI journey is concerned. A few things we've been working on a number of different things. One, which is we have a 3-year DEI roadmap. So we are a year into the roadmap, and the roadmap is a guide to help us think through everything from the type of procurement that we do, looking at some of the educational opportunities so that we could be a better ally on the DEI front. It also led to the formation of a culture council, which can help advance some of the agenda that's contained in the roadmap. But also more meaningful to you is that we're looking to expand our consultancy base and diversify our vendor pool. And there are a number of different procurement opportunities that we routinely do, which again will be talked about shortly, that we hope that there'll be a match between our needs and your capabilities, so that there's a synergy between the two, and so that this presentation will lead to some potentially some business opportunities. I would also be remiss in not mentioning, for example, the Emerging Developers Initiative is that, and from that perspective, it's also working with building capacity in the sense that we know that while we could help businesses grow by intentionally working with them but at the same time, to be even more impactful, we could expand into other areas and the Emerging Developers Initiative, and I'm hoping that that Annabelle will talk a little bit more about it, because this is a program under the TDI, is where we work with smaller developers and work with them to provide them with the skills, the resources, and allow so that they could grow and develop their capabilities so they could take on bigger projects that could have meaningful impact in the community that they serve, also expanding to other areas as well. And potentially also connecting them to larger developers that they could also act as a sub. All right. I would also, I'm going to be shortly passing the baton over to Claire, but I just want to end my portion of the presentation by saying that I already mentioned the introducing yourselves in the chat. We have asked for a copy of the attendance list so all the businesses that are present today, because what I would like to do is make sure that that information gets shared with all the different divisions within that organization. So while we're talking very specifically about certain type of procurement needs, there are going to be times when we're going to have needs for other types of services as well, different vendors. So sharing the list of attendees will be one of the things that we will be doing. And I would also just mention that because we're a quasi-government entity, we do follow the spirit of what's called 30B. And what 30B is, it is the state's procurement law. And it prescribes like all the different types of procurement you have to go through in order to obtain consultancies. I only mentioned that not to make it a deterrent, but just to make you aware that of the bigger context of how we operate from a procurement standpoint. And so with that said, I will pass the baton over to Mike. over to Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to be here and I appreciate this opportunity. As Teresa mentioned before, my name is Claire O'Neill. I'm Senior Vice President of Real Estate Planning, and I have the great privilege of working with a team of planners that work with mostly municipalities, but also nonprofits and other governmental agencies around the Commonwealth. My comments this afternoon are really going to focus on the house doctor contracts that we have. Those are the consultancy folks that Teresa mentioned. But before I get into that, I would like to talk a little bit about other opportunities that may be available through MassDevelopment as well. As Teresa mentioned, we are the developers at Devons. We're also the developers over at Carriage Grove, Belchertown, Village Hill, Northampton, Project in Taunton, and various other sites that we either own or participate in around the state. And one of the things that our engineering department does a lot of is working with consultants on the design and then also with contractors on the construction of infrastructure, usually horizontal infrastructure, to support the redevelopment of sites. And so this is simply an example that I'm showing on the screen today. The requirements are really laid out by the state as to what type of qualifications are needed for contractors that are interested in bidding on projects that MassDevelopment will contract with. So as I said, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but I did want to mention that that is a type of project that we do seek contractors for. In addition to that, oftentimes our asset management department or our development department are looking for maintenance contracts. For instance, at Village Hill in Northampton, I recently issued a request for quotes looking for people to do snow removal services, landscaping services, that type of thing. And we do that routinely for various projects across the Commonwealth as well. But getting back to the house doctors that I mentioned beforehand, I'm going to go through a series of slides and talk a little bit today about what we typically do with house doctors and also how you might become a house doctor in the future if you respond to an RFQ, that's a request for qualifications, or alternatively, we'd just love to know about your particular consultancy and your interest in doing work with MassDevelopment, and we will determine if there's an opportunity to work with you or not, which we hope there is. So as I mentioned, there are many MassDevelopment projects, initiatives, real estate, properties that we own across the Commonwealth. And what happens is we regularly require specialized work, and so we contract with house doctors to perform those services. Typically, it's an on-call contract. So what happens is we are looking to issue an RFQ, get a lot of interest from companies, and then determine who we are going to work with in the future and enter into a contract with them. It doesn't mean there's actually a piece of work that is going to be required in the next month or so. It could take place over a number of years. We do look for multiple skill sets, and as I mentioned, we don't guarantee a minimum quantity of work, but we do enter into an overall contract that typically has a number associated with it. And that number is really, it's based on what we expect that over a period of years, what we expect we might need from that type of consultant. It's typically a contract that lasts between 3 and 5 years. We would anticipate that a house doctor would work on a number of assignments across the state. We would prefer to work with contractors that know that particular region of the state, but sometimes that's not possible. So we do ask that contractors will be able to work in any of the communities. And I mentioned that sometimes we have work immediately, sometimes it may be a year or two before we actually engage directly on a scope of work. So I wanted to provide a couple of examples of projects that we've worked on in the past couple of years. And this particular slide shows some work that we were doing in the town of Somerset. We were looking at an opportunity and constraints analysis, some very early conceptual planning. And in this particular case, we worked with Stantec, which obviously is a very large firm. And we engaged them to do some community engagement, some initial planning work, look at the constraints, etc. The reason I'm showing you this slide today, in particular with Stantec, is that I wanted to give this group a sense of some of the larger firms that we also work with. And on the planning side, what we will typically try to do when we're looking at a project is we will often match a larger firm and a smaller firm together in working on a project. And so not only does this mean that we have the capacity that a large firm might bring to a project, but it's also a relationship, it's also an opportunity, for those smaller firms to create a relationship with a firm of that size. And that obviously can sometimes lead to additional work and relationships. Another example of work might be something like a community engagement process. This particular work was done with Studio Luz in the city of Lynn. We were working with Lynn to better understand the community's interest in the repositioning of the old viaducts. And so Studio Luz worked with us fantastically to really be able to understand that community engagement process. And they were able to bring their language skills to the table as well and be able to communicate effectively in the Spanish language as well as English. I'm going to turn over now to Annabelle, who's going to talk a little bit about TDI, and then I'll see you again in a few minutes. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Claire and Teresa. I will explain and go back and Teresa covered this already, but I'll expand a little bit on it. I know you see acronyms and I wanted to unpack that for a second before I jump into a few examples. I thought it would be helpful just to share a few examples of some of the technical assistance support that we provide to the House Doctor program. And that way you can see some sort of the opportunities that we have at MassDevelopment. As Teresa mentioned, TDI stands for Transformative Development Initiative, and it's a program right now. It's essentially an economic development accelerator in gateway cities. Right now, we're working in 13 communities. We call that TDI districts. And specifically what we do in those communities is support small businesses and really build up the infrastructure of those communities. Specifically, when I say infrastructure, I mean more like the human side of the infrastructure through sustainable partnerships. And another piece that I will also add to some sort of set the table before I jump into some specific example is minority business enterprises play an important role at MassDevelopment, and the way that is translated into our work, specifically the technical assistance program, is many of the TDI districts are facing this investment and have a vast, diverse demographic. And usually the expertise that we look for those specific reasons has to meet specific things like cultural competencies, like language, or simply understand or relate to the community or desire of that community. So, and let me jump into specifically how this translates into the buckets. So I added the 3 buckets that we usually look through when we're thinking about technical assistance. So the first one is sometimes the community is at the stage of like starting up, right? Like the community that it needs some planning, some visioning, and really gather the community and think about like how in 10 to 20 years we're gonna be investing and evolving the community. And I will get into each of these buckets, the blue buckets that you see under that, in a minute, but I wanted to some sort of share the big picture of the different buckets that we work on there. The second bucket is early growth, and these communities usually are the ones that need implementation, that are ready essentially to activate and try things out more than anything. We do a lot of, and I get again, into this in a minute, a lot of like placemaking and activation of spaces, trying things out, and many of those opportunities becoming a long-standing opportunity. And the last bucket is accelerating. This one in particular is when we need services more about sustainability. And this bucket in particular happened, and this, I didn't mention this, but usually we're in this community, these 13 communities in this case, we're gonna be there for 3 years specifically. So the accelerating bucket usually happen, those kind of services towards the end of the 3rd year. Where we're thinking, well, we're going to be exiting this community. What are some of the things that are longstanding, that we can essentially, what's our legacy more than anything that we can leave behind, and making sure they have the structure to sustain the work long term. And across the board, I will say the theme that we carry out through these 3 buckets is small business support through either market analysis, retail coaching, workshops, and individual business plans. Next slide, please. So within the startup bucket, as I mentioned, comprehensive planning probably is the most popular one, and we are actually in that phase in so many of the communities that we're setting out right now. And specifically, this means like that we will need services, skills in engaging the community in planning and visioning. Consultants most likely will offer approaches to community engagement. We like to approach community engagement in a very untraditional way. Sometimes, specifically, we do traditional, but also untraditional. And what I mean by that is like sometimes meeting the community where they are. So there's a lot of services required around like people who really embrace community engagement from that perspective, right? Like in many of these communities, we have people working like 2 jobs, right? Like how are you going to meet those people that usually don't have time to go to those community meetings? The second bucket, it will be identity building, sorry. Those are services that are more around branding, wayfinding, placemaking, public art. We do a little bit of this in more, I will say, in a more intensive way on the second bucket that I'm going to get in a minute, but this is more like the initial planning. Like let's think about how this will play out within the comprehensive vision and planning. The third one is capacity development. This is something that we really like to do at the beginning of the work, because at the end of that 3rd year, right, we want to be able to look back and say, we were able to provide resources and technical assistance and build up that leadership that is going to sustain the work long term. Next slide. Thank you. This is the early growth bucket. And as I mentioned, active use strategy is one of probably the biggest, most utilized services that we utilize in this stage. And this one is like to support public space activation strategy, art installation, parks, bike trails, market. It is really is a need, if this particular community has a need for activating downtowns and creating that some sort of like management tool to keep a lot of those activities going, is also another piece under that. More specifically, thinking about the market, pulling market data and all that stuff. The other one under this category is the temporary community design activation. This one in particular is to demonstrate what's the potential of the market in that particular community. And we have like an example of that is complete street placemaking and public event strategy. Next slide, please. And this one is, as I mentioned, this one is the sustainability kind of services that we utilize through TA. This one include services like district management. Many of you have heard the terms of like DIF, TIF. Sorry, I'm throwing out a lot of acronyms. Like the BID is probably the most one of the most popular one out there when we really want to create strategy and support in a place, in this case, in the district. Essentially what that means is like when we want to expertise to sustain the work and many of the complementary public services in that community, right? Like activation of spaces, place making, sometimes even like pick up the trash in that district and all that stuff. So we need the scope that we usually need in that process is like engaging property owners, right? And thinking through how we can come up with a strategy. Who are the players? Who are the board that is going to sustain that work long term? The second bucket is marketing and communication support. This is in some ways related to the first bucket, right? But also, what is the long-term branding and campaign that we want to push in this community to really capitalize more resources in the community and more investment more than anything? The third one will be project feasibility and implementation reports. This one, usually we try to, sounds like I like to tell when we go through this particular one, it sounds like very wonky, but at the same time, I always tell my team, like, and many of the consultants and house doctors that we engage, like, let's make sure this work is not going to land at a shelf. Let's make sure this is actionable, driven work. So we try to engage consultants who are going to really integrate advisory services and recommendations that is going to be actionable around technical assistance, things that people can do short-term and long-term. Next slide, please. And I'll pass it on to Claire, but I also wanted to highlight a little bit about the point that Teresa had mentioned earlier about the emerging developers, which essentially is a program that we have had a TDI for about 4 years now, but now we are scaling the program up to make it more like agency-wide. The program essentially, for the last 2 years, we have created different cohorts to provide trainings and tools to emerging developers, small firms who really wanted to expand their knowledge in the field. And it was honestly very successful. We have trained over 20 or 30, each cohort had about 20 participants, and it was a very impactful program based on what we heard, what we have seen, and people really learn tools such as like pro forma, right? Like when you think about that financing and pre-work before development, and right now what we're thinking, and I don't want to speak out of turn, we're still shaping up the program, but essentially we are thinking more to create a network and instill more like social capital into the group and more mentoring and support. And if people have questions, we're going to include my email at the end. I'm happy to set up a call if people are interested in learning more, and also include them in the mailing list. So when we're going to launch, hopefully early next year, you are the first one to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Annabelle. So how does a firm apply to become a house doctor? So periodically we do issue the notices and distribute an RFQ for house doctor. And again, a house doctor to us would be typically urban planners, community engagement, arts and culture feasibility experts, small business experts, variety of sort of professional services. Different areas of the agency might also solicit legal assistance from outside law firms. They might seek appraisal assistance from appraisers across the Commonwealth. But for Annabelle and my purposes, the first ones that I listed are more in line with what we typically look for. So on the screen, you can see the website that where we list all of our RFQs, all of our RFPs, all of the bidding requests for the construction projects and everything else. Everything goes through this website, as well as in other advertised media. The individual RFQ itself, or RFP, will provide detail on what we're looking for in terms of the consultants, and it really offers an opportunity, a targeted opportunity for firms to respond and provide information about what expertise they have. We try to make the RFQ very easy to respond to and give people the opportunity to upload former projects that they've worked on, reports and just highlights, things like that. But we're obviously looking for a lot of core information that's necessary for us to make a decision. And that information includes, leadership and staffing, background, relevant project experience. The list is here on the screen. And one of the most important pieces that is a part of the review process is the diverse business enterprise participation schedule and narrative, which I will get more into in a moment. So we are absolutely committed to seeking opportunities from diverse business enterprises, and that includes women-owned enterprises, veteran-owned, service-disabled veterans, and also obviously minority-owned business enterprises. It's something that we have really brought to the forefront, and I'll give you a few of the details in a moment about what we achieved this last RFQ round, but we were very pleased with the responses that we received from minority business enterprises, and if we're looking for more opportunity to contract with MBEs. This last round, in 2022, we were seeking contractors or consultants in master planning, permitting analysis, financial feasibility analysis, site engineering, small business development, arts and culture feasibility. And as I mentioned before, we have a form contract that's included in the RFQ so that firms can see ahead of time what our expectations are. But if there's something that a firm isn't able to achieve, or it's something that they're not able to agree to at this time, then we make it very clear that we'd like to understand what the particular contract issue might be, and we're prepared to have a discussion as to whether or not we can accommodate any requests for modifications to the contract. And the same thing goes for our insurance requirements. We're very specific in the RFQs as to what we would prefer and what we'd like to see from consultants. But if there's a particular reason why a consultant can't meet that particular insurance requirement, then we are willing to have a discussion about it. And we're very upfront in the RFQ about that. In 2022, we actually received 59 responses. They were analyzed based on what you can see on the screen, including the participation schedule from diverse business enterprises. And we ended up offering contracts to 29 firms. It's a 4-year house structure contract with an extension if both parties agree. And of these, 51% of the contracts that we offered were diverse business enterprises, and 31%, that is 9 of the contracts, did go to minority business enterprises. And this is a higher percentage than we have seen in the past. And it's really a higher percentage of MBE firms and DBE firms that responded to us. But we are always looking for new opportunities to meet MBE firms, and we know that we can always improve in our outreach. In terms of next step opportunities, we do anticipate later in 2023 going out with another RFQ seeking the types of consultants that you see on the screen here. We may add additional ones, we may change this, but those are the ones that right now we can anticipate that's the expertise that we'll be looking for. However, in addition to that, we are, as I mentioned, always looking for MBE firms that we might strike a relationship with. And so, we would ask that you contact us directly if you're an MBE firm and you're looking for consulting opportunities, or you're an MBE firm involved in maintenance contracts or construction contracts. We would like to hear from all of those firms and find a way to see if we can engage with you more directly than this next RFQ in 2023. So yes, if we'd ask that you contact us either on the email addresses that you'll see in a second, or through this general contact us on our main website. And please just brief note identifying you're an MBE firm looking for opportunities, and any links to websites or other materials that you might have, and we will be in touch and chat about what we can do to work together. that concludes our presentation today. We'd like to thank you very much indeed, and we're looking forward to discussing some questions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Claire, Annabelle and Teresa. That was really informative. There's a load of questions I'm going to ask, and we've got some coming in through our Q&A feature. Firstly, let's start with that MBE, I guess, request and offer and openness. I think it's fantastic that, Teresa, you made the point of actively seeking to research our attendees today and find out, what businesses are out there and what capabilities they have. I guess the first question, in your slides, you mentioned self-certifying DBEs. And I guess there's just a question is, do you see that being something that you guys stick to in terms of an openness to work with that firm? Or would you actually recommend that DBEs do go ahead and get a formal certification with the SDO or another agency?
So I'll start answering, but I'm also going to open it up to Claire and Annabelle to chime in as well. What I would say is we would just love to work with MBEs and just all minority businesses. So I think what I would note is that we do annual reporting to the state, the Supply Diversity Office. And in it, we note two things. The procurement that we do with certified businesses. But we also note that we work with businesses that are not certified. And those numbers vary quite a bit. Well, so the tally of those two numbers are very different in the sense that and historically, I think we've ranged anywhere from like 6 to 11% of our procurement has been done with MBEs and DBEs, but only a percentage of that is certified businesses. So we're not doing our procurement in a way where you have to be a certified business in order to be qualified as a DBE or MBE. I think that at some point, it will make it easier for them to be able to do businesses across the board as if they had that certification. But for the purpose of mass development, that is not a requirement per se.
That's great.
Annabelle and Claire, please feel free to chime in as well.
I think you covered it very well.
Perfect. And I guess a follow-up question around the openness. You mentioned the point of open to a conversation, if a firm isn't hitting all of those RFQ requirements. Almost by having those conversations, is there anything that has changed your practices or what you've learned in terms of the opportunities that you might publicize and any of your internal processes? In a way that, again, is making sure that we're not excluding firms who might not be ready today, but could be tomorrow.
Do either of you want to take that on?
Thank you. I think what I can just say is that, we really want to work with a broad range of business that starts from, entrepreneurs that are really starting their business and have a valuable skill set to offer, right through to multinational corporations. Everyone has a role and an opportunity to work with mass development and help the Commonwealth and the communities in it. We as a state agent or as a quasi-public agency, obviously we have responsibilities to the communities that we're doing work with. And so there are certain skill sets, such as engineering, where and architectural services, where we really need to have very strong insurance requirements in place. But then there are other mechanisms or other types of project work that we do where, somebody may live in the city and not own a vehicle and therefore they really don't need the auto insurance that we are requiring on our standard insurance pieces. So, you know, obviously in that particular case, we can work with that individual to ensure that they that we get a procure or an insurance waiver. It's all very well documented, and it's all very well vetted through the agency. You know, we're not going to make cavalier assessments as to whether or not people should have insurance in place, but we are very prepared to have a conversation about it.
That's fantastic. And sticking with you, Claire, for a second, if you don't mind, you use the example of a previous project, and was this idea that you're quite keen actually to offer maybe smaller firms who don't have the large scale capability, you know, to partner with one of those maybe more established or larger firms. Is it helpful if a subcontractor or a smaller firm already has a relationship with one of those large firms? Or actually, is it an opportunity, you think, you know, for that smaller firm to really have a new partnership? You know, so yeah, from your perspective, is there a preference there, or any insight you can give our audience?
So from a programmatic point of view, it would be our preference to be able to help a new relationship occur, help facilitate a new relationship. Obviously, the firms themselves will need to appreciate one another. But if we can make an introduction on a project, then I see that as another win on that particular project.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah,
I also want to add.
Yes, go for it, Annabelle.
I think also, I mean, aside from what Claire just mentioned in terms of like the opportunities, the waiver and all that stuff, I feel like at TDI, we have some sort of like unique opportunity also to do those kind of like subcontracting options. And we have done those in the past, actually. In fact, like last year when we were doing partnership development, it feels like last year was actually earlier this year, in the past fiscal year, we did a few internal matching with house doctors, right? Like a house doctor that was new, essentially that haven't done much work with mass development, and we matched that person with another house doctor who has a lot more experience working with us, and it worked great. And we I think with this commitment with DI, and to MBEs and this work, I mean, my team, we've been encouraging, right, to do those kind of deals too. So, I mean, just to echo what the team has been saying, like those things are priorities, and we've been trying to also, within obviously the parameters and the rules that we have to follow, right, be creative and provide those opportunities in a more unique way as well.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, Annabelle. Teresa, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing, which is that going back to identifying some of the barriers for small businesses who are trying to do business with agencies like MassDevelopment. You know, we're not in their shoes, so we don't know what are some of the challenges that they have. So it's only by being aware of them that we could then address them, right? And we want to be as small business friendly as possible. So, you know, when Claire gave those great examples of, you know, somebody who, why would they need an auto insurance liability when they don't even have a car, for example? Like,
right.
There are other instances where we, just by default, when you're doing so many contracts, for example, like you establish certain benchmarks, and like we just sort of end up doing those things by rote, but that doesn't always have to be the case. So if there are ways where there are room for improvement in how we do our work, whether it's from a communication standpoint, whether it's some of the requirements that we have, we would love to be more responsive so that we could lower the barrier to small businesses, DBEs and MBEs doing work with us. So, I mean, from that perspective, having that be more of a dialogue and identifying those opportunities would be, what those opportunities can be, would be very helpful.
Perfect. And I think one thing that we're very keen to do, you know, through this Pacesetters initiative is really help set some expectations and make sure that, you know, our MBEs, if they're spending the time to engage, always understand what might come from that. And I know you mentioned about the house doctors maybe not getting work instantly or, within the first few months. I mean, is there a chance that a house doctor who comes on board actually might not end up getting any work? Is that a possibility? Again, just to kind of set expectations for the firms.
May I take this, Teresa? Great. So I will admit that that has happened in the past. And we really, when we went out to look for house doctors in this 2022 round, we really reviewed why that had happened. And it's very important to us that we do provide work to the house doctors that we have contracted. And so we were very careful to not take on more house doctors than we thought we might have work over the next 4 years. And we made sure that we had a broad selection. And the way that we track the house doctor contracts now will show both Annabelle and I and our teams exactly what amount of money has been actually actively programmed to which house doctor and whether they've been used this particular year. So I think we have tried to put more tools at our fingertips as program managers and project managers to ensure that that doesn't happen in the future.
That's really helpful. Annabelle, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Claire said. Also, we are doing a lot of collaboration across the agency, across departments, right? Specifically, real estate has a specific set of need, but also TDI has, a whole different set of needs. And one thing that we have learned at TDI is usually, about this, as I mentioned, those 3 buckets, right? Like the same kind of services. And one thing that we've been trying to do is rotate the house doctor, right? Create a system where we can also provide opportunities to everyone in our pipeline. And we have started to create some trackers in collaboration with Claire, right? To make sure that we also are providing opportunities with the hope that we will reach everyone that has applied to be do business with us.
Perfect. And I guess a practical point, that there's the web page that you shared, there's your contact details, there's another email shared. If someone today is really interested in engaging, what's the best first port of call? Is it to email one of you guys? Is it to go via the website, and fill out that form as you mentioned, Claire? What practical steps can people take today if they're ready?
So I would say for the folks that are on this webinar today, the most practical thing would probably be to contact us at our direct email addresses. We will have the list of people who are on here today, and we will look out for contact from you. Since this webinar will be going out on YouTube and sort of out there over time, I would suggest that that the contact us on the website is probably the best way for people to look in the future. Only because people move on over time, and also as open as all of our email systems are, sometimes things get filtered and we don't have control over that. So I would encourage people to also in the future use the website and the contact us, and that will ensure that that our marketing department is able to reach out to us and make sure we have follow up with you.
Perfect, thank you. I can see that you've gone onto that slide that just has a reminder of opportunities coming up. So I think that's great. I think, Claire, if you wanted to stop sharing the screen, we can kind of bring things to a close. For me, that's been fantastic. I think, again, the openness and the interest, in really seeking more businesses to work with and ensuring that your information is accessible. It's something that we definitely encourage across the network. And so it's lovely to see that happening in practice today. I guess one kind of final question, to leave the audience with a few insights perhaps. if you were to consider a business that has engaged well with you in the past, maybe that's a TDI program or you know, a house doctor or a contract, can you give any insight to, you know, what they did well? You know, what made your lives easier in terms of engaging with that firm? So yeah, I don't know who wants to go with that, if you want to go around, but yeah, just a couple of nuggets to leave the audience with would be great.
I'll jump in first. Thank you. I think being relatively prompt with communication and having you know, being able to respond either via email or via telephone and have a conversation and really understand project timelines and just clear communication and agreement on timelines for projects is really key.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I will echo that. Communication, I feel like we specifically is usually.
Looks like Annabelle got froze. Oh, no, you're back, Annabelle.
Annabelle,
Okay.
would you mind just repeating that? You just froze for a second there.
Okay.
Oh, I think we might have lost Annabelle again. Teresa, do you want to bring us home with that?
Sure. I think Claire nailed it in the sense that I think small businesses face challenges that larger corporations don't, right? And that could have an impact on the work they do and how they do it. And I think there's some additional challenges that they have to face. Having that good back and forth communication, I think, is key to a successful job. So one, I mean, we will do our part to make sure that as far as our expectations and our timeline and all those things are made very clear, but also just understanding from a deliverable standpoint, if there's something goes awry, just having that open line of communications is always very, very helpful. The other thing I would just, you know, sort of branching out a little bit is that, you know, it's while we love, you know, we want to continue to do the work with the audience that's out there, but if you could refer other organizations as well. I mean, we want to just sort of get the word out. We're a fairly large organization. We want to be impactful in the areas that we serve, and through the work that Claire and Annabelle do, like, we can have a meaningful impact. So please, you know, share this information with others. We are committed to working with DBEs and MBEs. We're here because of that reason. So please just help us spread the word.
Fantastic. I think that's a great parting message. Communication, you know, check out the opportunities, but also reach out. And like I said, knowing that you guys are actively doing that for our participants today, yeah, and for those who you hear of, it is fantastic. Okay, well, that's it. That was our 15th and final Doing Business webinar for this year. We'll have plenty more in 2023. Just to give a couple of final notes before we depart today, we at the Chamber have our Women's Network session on women leading construction and real estate development next Thursday at Converse. So obviously after today's discussion, that's really relevant, and I think something that we can all learn from. And looking ahead to January 28th, we have our flagship Pinnacle Awards. The Pinnacle Awards is the premier event for women in business and honors incredible leading women for their outstanding contributions to the workplace and commitment to enhancing the quality of life in the region. And just to kind of come back to what you guys presented there, I think this idea of reimagining community, both through the physical space and connections, is so crucial. So yeah, do check out the Pinnacle Awards as well. You can find all of that information on bostonchamber.com, and shortly we will also have the video posted on our website as well as our YouTube page from today. So thanks again to Teresa, Claire and Annabelle from MassDevelopment. thanks to you all for joining today and from home, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you for having us. Bye, everyone.